DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? And she said, it's sitting on my desk right now to review.
We have quite a range of topics today. It's fascinating stuff. We're going to dive into everything from some pretty intense inquiries about sensitive lists to the really urgent realities of domestic disaster response, like what we saw in Texas. Then there are the international diplomatic efforts, which are always complex. And of course, we'll look at what the administration itself is highlighting as its recent wins, its achievements. Okay, so let's jump right in. Let's start with a moment that definitely grabbed headlines, a pretty challenging exchange in a recent briefing. It involved Fox News' Peter Doocy, and he brought up a prior statement from Attorney General Pam Bondi.
So what happened to the Epstein client list that the Attorney General said she had on her desk?
Well, I think if you go back and look at what the Attorney General said in that interview, which was on your network, on Fox News.
Got the quote.
Go ahead.
John Roberts said, DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? And she said, it's sitting on my desk right now to review.
What exactly was Doocy asking there? What was he trying to get at?
Well, Doocy, he didn't really hold back, did he? He asked Leavitt straight up. So what happened to the Epstein client list the Attorney General said she had on her desk? And this wasn't just some vague question. It was specific. See, Attorney General Pam Bondi, she had stated actually on Fox News that this list, quote, it's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's a very direct quote. John Roberts asked if the DOJ might release it, and that was her answer.
Right.
A direct quote.
Exactly. And the critical thing here is how an official statement like that, well, it becomes kind of an accountability tripwire. When someone that high up makes such a definitive claim, it just creates a public expectation. You expect follow-up. So then the absence of any follow-through, that becomes its own story. It forces the administration to respond. They have to choose sort of between addressing something potentially uncomfortable or trying to navigate all the public speculation. It puts real immediate pressure on the press secretary to manage those earlier statements.
So, okay, Bonnie says it's on her desk. Then, nothing. No official confirmation, no release. The public's just left wondering, right? What did happen? From the administration's viewpoint, how do you even handle that when past statements and current actions maybe don't seem to line up? It's a really delicate balancing act. No easy answer. They have to decide, basically, do they acknowledge the prior statement directly and try to explain the discrepancy? Or do they try to pivot? Maybe talk more broadly about ongoing investigations or legal processes, keep it vague. The fact that this specific question keeps surfacing, though, it signals how impactful that initial statement really was. And the lack of clarity afterwards left this void, this gap that the public clearly wants filled. It really tests the administration's stated commitment to transparency, especially on a topic this sensitive, this widely discussed.
Yeah, absolutely. And while, Washington gets caught up in these high-stakes inquiries, the administration is also facing immediate, very somber realities right there on the ground, like the devastating floods we saw that just ravaged parts of Texas recently. Press Secretary Leavitt addressed this directly.
But there were early and consistent warnings. And again, the National Weather Service did its job. On July 2nd, there were initial notices of potential weather and flooding risks were issued.
She detailed the timing, but also, importantly, the warnings that went out. What was her main message about what the National Weather Service did?
Leavitt was very clear on this point, very direct. She stated, the flood hit in the very early hours of the morning. But there were early and consistent warnings. And again, the National Weather Service did its job. She really emphasized the proactive steps the NWS took, pointing out they issued initial notices, warnings about potential severe weather and flooding risks way back on July 2nd. And then throughout July 3rd, those warnings got more serious. They escalated, culminating in a specific flood watch being issued at 1:18 p.m. that day. This timeline, she highlighted it specifically to show a consistent, dedicated effort to alert residents about the danger coming.
Okay, so they laid out that timeline, but still, despite those warnings, there was criticism, right? People started alleging that maybe the NWS offices were understaffed and that maybe that hampered the warnings somehow. Leavitt had a pretty direct counter to that, didn't she?
Are there concerns within the White House or from the president himself over the cuts that happened under Musk while he was advising DOJ, including the National Weather Service?
I think I've already addressed that, Kristen, and what I can tell you is that these offices were fully staffed. The San Angelo office was fully staffed with 12 forecast meteorologists. There were no vacancies.
What was her specific rebuttal to those staffing claims? And what does that tell us about how they managed the narrative in a crisis?
That was very direct and numerical. Specific numbers. She stated, quote, the San Angelo office was fully staffed with 12 forecast meteorologists. The San Antonio office was operating with 11 forecasters, end quote. So this was a clear attempt, a very direct pushback against what she framed as fake news circulating about NWS staffing. Providing those concrete numbers was meant to underscore that the offices weren't just, open, they were fully staffed, operational during the event. And this approach, it signals the administration's strategy, right? They move quickly, definitively, to push back on any narrative that suggests incompetence or underpreparedness, especially when facing a national tragedy. The goal is to control the narrative by providing specific, what they present as verifiable facts.
Makes sense. And beyond just the warnings and the staffing numbers, Leavitt also summed up the administration's overall view of the disaster.
This is a national tragedy, and the administration is treating it as such. We know the National Weather Service provided early and consistent warnings. They gave out timely flash flood alerts.
Recognition is absolutely crucial. It really sets the tone for the entire federal response. When it's officially declared a national tragedy, it acts like a trigger. It triggers a rapid deployment of federal resources. We're talking aid, personnel, supplies, getting it all to the affected areas as quickly as humanly possible to help the American citizens who've been impacted. It's about showing immediate, tangible support and really asserting federal leadership in those recovery efforts.
Okay, let's shift gears now. Another critical area, one that's always in the national discussion, border security. There was a very disturbing incident, a shooting at a Border Patrol facility down in McAllen, Texas, and Press Secretary Leavitt reacted to that with a very pointed message.
It comes just days after Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal recently said she gets, quote, inspired when activists obstruct ICE. Does the White House expect Democrats to tone down their rhetoric in light of what we saw today in McAllen, Texas?
We certainly call on Democrats to tone down their rhetoric.
What was her call to action about political rhetoric?
Right. Leavitt didn't just condemn the shooting itself, which of course they did. She used it as an opportunity, really, to make a strong call for toning down the rhetoric surrounding border issues. She said, "We certainly call on Democrats to tone down their rhetoric against ICE and Border Patrol agents." And then she added, 8, these are honorable Americans who are simply trying to do their job. So her response placed the incident squarely within the context of, these heightened tensions around border security and the safety of agents. She directly attributed the shooting, at least partly, to what she called inflammatory political rhetoric. It really underscored the administration's view that words can have real-world consequences, dangerous ones. And it highlights their strong emphasis on supporting law enforcement personnel at the border.
And sticking with immigration policy for a moment, Leavitt also took time to clarify the administration's position on temporary protected status.
Because TPS, temporary protective status, is temporary by definition. It is not meant to be a permanent path to residency or citizenship.
TPS, that's been a point of a lot of ongoing debate, hasn't it? What was her definition of TPS? And what's the bigger policy debate her statement pushes back against?
She offered a very, very firm definition, no ambiguity.
Quote,
TPS, temporary protected status, is temporary by definition. It is not meant to be a permanent path to residency or citizenship here in the United States of America, end quote. Now, what's really crucial here is understanding this isn't just like a word game, a semantic distinction. For many people, TPS has been renewed over and over, sometimes for decades, which essentially created a kind of de facto long-term residency for certain groups.
Right. People have built lives here under TPS.
Exactly. And Leavitt's very firm reiteration that it's temporary, that's its definition, that directly pushes back against arguments for extending it indefinitely or making it permanent. It signals the administration's intent to draw a much stricter line, defining who qualifies for these protections and how long they should last. It's a very clear statement of their policy stance, especially amidst calls from advocates for expanded pathways to permanence for TPS holders.
Okay, so from domestic policy debates, let's move over to international affairs. There were some initial reports, caused a bit of a stir actually, about weapons shipments to Ukraine.
This was a standard review by the Pentagon of all weapons and all aid and all support that the United States is providing all countries and all regions around the world, not just Ukraine.
Whispers that maybe the U.S. was reconsidering or even halting some vital aid. How did the administration respond to that? How did they clarify those concerns?
Yeah, that definitely raised some eyebrows initially. But Leavitt offered a really crucial clarification to try and dispel those concerns. She stated, this was a standard review by the Pentagon of all weapons and all aid and all support that the United States is providing all countries and all regions around the globe. So while those first reports did spark worry, especially among allies, about a potential shift in U.S. policy toward Ukraine, The Pentagon's clarification framed it very differently, as merely a routine, comprehensive review, not specific to Ukraine, but of all global aid programs.
So just standard operating procedure, essentially.
That's how they framed it. It's a strategic communication move,
Yeah.
right? Designed to manage those international expectations, reassure allies, to say, look, processes are ongoing, reviews happen, but the core commitment hasn't changed. Importantly, no specific changes to Ukraine support were actually confirmed, highlighting that the Pentagon's review was, more bureaucratic, not some major policy pivot away from supporting Ukraine.
Got it. Okay. And turning to another major international focus, the incredibly complex ongoing conflict in Gaza. Press Secretary Leavitt also updated on President Trump's stated priorities for the Middle East.
The utmost priority for the president right now in the Middle East is to end the war in Gaza and to return all of the hostages.
What exactly is the president's utmost priority in the region, according to her? And what does that tell us about their diplomatic strategy there?
According to Leavitt, President Trump's utmost priority in the region is actually multifaceted. It's twofold. She said it's to end the war in Gaza and to return all of the hostages. Well, that dual priority, she indicated, is what underpins the administration's active diplomatic efforts right now. She also elaborated a bit on the status of a critical ceasefire proposal, stating that, quote, there was a ceasefire proposal that Israel supports that was sent to Hamas. We hope that they will agree to this proposal.
Okay, so a proposal is on the table, Israel supports it, waiting on Hamas.
Precisely. And that framing reveals the significant diplomatic pressure being applied. Emphasizing that Israel supports the proposal and expressing hope for Hamas's agreement, it's a strategic way to frame these very delicate ongoing negotiations. It subtly, or maybe not so subtly, places the onus on Hamas for any further delays in reaching a ceasefire and getting those hostages home.
Right. Okay. Now let's kind of round out this deep dive. Let's shift gears to what the administration itself is celebrating, what they're calling their extraordinary wins. What specific achievements is Press Secretary Leavitt really highlighting right now? What's the narrative they're trying to build with these points?
Yeah, she definitely presented a strong list, designed to paint a picture of administration really delivering results. She highlighted first that job numbers have beaten expectations again. For the fourth straight month, she emphasized, indicating strong, sustained job growth.
Jobs numbers beat market expectations with nearly 150,000 good jobs created in the month of June. The American economy has now added nearly 700,000 jobs since January 2025.
Then she pointed to illegal border crossings being at historic lows. That's a huge point for them, signaling improved border security. And something that hits everyone's wallet, she noted gas prices are currently at a 4-year low.
Jobs, border, gas prices, key issues.
Exactly. This isn't just a random list. It's carefully curated. These specific points are chosen because they touch on major concerns for a lot of Americans. The economy, border control, everyday costs. They're meant to reinforce this message of effective governance, of competence. The goal is clearly to boost public confidence in the administration's policies and direction.
And maybe the crowning jewel in that list of accomplishments, Leavitt detailed the signing of what she called President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, signed on the South Lawn of the White House on the 4th of July itself, declaring it now the law of the land.
President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill is now the law of the land. Republicans in Congress met the once-in-a-generation moment and codified the Make America Great Again agenda into law.
What's the significance of that particular bill and the timing?
Well, the One Big Beautiful Bill, as they branded it, it represents a major legislative package. It carefully brings together several key policy priorities of the administration, consolidates them into one single comprehensive piece of legislation, passing it and then signing it on such a symbolically huge day like the 4th of July. That's undoubtedly presented as a monumental achievement, a big win. It's framed as clear evidence of the administration's ability to, get things done. It consolidates recent legislative and policy successes, and it aims to solidify their legacy by showing a real tangible impact on the nation's laws. It's definitely a clear signal to supporters and critics alike of their legislative power and effectiveness.
And Leavitt really summed it all up, didn't she? Left no doubt about how they see things. She said, it's safe to say that over the past few weeks, the president has delivered on many, many wins.